All right. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody out there in Facebook. For those of you who haven't been here before, this is our weekly interview series. Today, we're very fortunate to have an interview and also performance with a great drummer and band leader and champion of music in the Pacific Northwest. This is Max Holmberg, and so wonderful drummer, as I said, and does a lot for the music community. So we're very happy to have him with us today. Max, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, as with all our guests, what I usually like to start with is asking about how you got started in music and interested in music and deciding to become a musician as a profession. So can you tell us a little bit about your humble beginnings?
Sure. Well, my family is fairly musical, so it goes back generations and generations, actually, to like the vaudeville thing. They were like actors and musicians who kind of did a lot of that stuff. It was kind of all-encompassing, or at least I've been told. And then more recently, I grew up listening to things like Count Basie and Earth, Wind and Fire. So my family was pretty into what I would consider good music. And there was a drum set at my grandfather's house, and I would kind of bang on that. And one time I even drew cartoons on the bass drum head with crayons, and it's still there. Anyway, but that wasn't really serious music. I took music classes in elementary school, hated singing class, absolutely hated it. Took piano lessons, because my mom wanted me to take piano lessons. She's a pianist and a singer as well. And I hated piano. I wanted nothing to do with music at all. And so when it was time to go to, I took snare drum in 4th grade and 5th grade. And I played drum set already a little bit, but, to learn the technical way of playing the drums, I guess. And so I did that for a couple years, just kind of fun, late elementary school stuff. And then middle school came around, and my mom was really trying to convince me to join the jazz band at Eckstein Middle School, and I was having none of it. I was like, no, I hate music. I don't want to do anything related to jazz band. I will not go. No way. And I forget how she convinced me to go to the audition, but I did for piano. And I tried on piano, and I intentionally bombed the audition because I didn't want to be in jazz band. So I intentionally played terribly and acted like I knew nothing about music at all. Piano audition was done, and the legendary director, Max Holmberg, said, "Okay, well, do you play anything else, besides piano?" And I was looking at the drum set, and I was like, well, I play a little drum set, it's kind of fun. And he was like, well, all right, get on the drums. So I wasn't really thinking, and I sort of did okay at the drum audition, I guess. And next thing I knew, I was in jazz band on drums. And that was totally unexpected, but I was like, well, I guess I'll try it out. And then the next thing I knew, it was basically my favorite thing ever, and I was playing drums all the time, and here we are.
Well, I need to back up for a minute, because
Yeah.
I should have asked this before, but you grew up in Seattle, correct?
I did, yeah.
Seattle area?
Yep.
And your family that came before you that were all involved in entertainment and show business, were they also in the Seattle area or from elsewhere?
Let's see. So the last 3 generations, I guess, have been in Seattle-ish. Before that, I guess it was like Omaha and Chicago, and before that, I honestly don't really know. Somewhere, maybe in Europe even. I don't know.
Cool. Well, and the other thing I wanted to ask, and we've talked about this with some of our other guests, kind of hitting a point that I like to touch on, particularly with music education and quote-unquote jazz education. You wanted nothing to do with it. Then you got involved with the program with a legendary teacher who knew how to play and teach and perform it, and that piqued your interest. Is that safe to say?
Yep.
So what about your teacher and playing in that group inspired you and wanted you to start down the path of playing music and eventually becoming a musician?
I don't know that it was, well, initially, I think the thing that kind of turned me onto it was just actually playing with a big band for the first time on the drum set. It was just, a totally new thing for me, and it was really fun, even though I really didn't know what I was doing for the most part. But it was just the feeling of kind of driving, like, at that point, probably like a 28, 30 piece big band or something. And then, of course, the teaching kind of came in, and that was amazing. I mean, as you said, he's still doing it. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows how to inspire kids to get into listening to music, checking out music on their own, simultaneously kind of finding their own voice on their instrument, but also getting better at just the fundamentals and working on their craft basically from the ground up.
Well, and you were playing, you said 4th and 5th grade in band, and for audience members that don't know about band programs, usually when you start on drums, you'll start on like snare drum, or if you want to be in the drum section, you might play snare or cymbals or chimes
bells,
or bells,
something like that.
So you started with that, and then you were in jazz band. Prior to joining jazz band, or I'm assuming at some point you were getting private lessons on drums. When did that come into play?
Well, I had primarily I was actually self-taught until I got to college. I had a few lessons here and there, kind of in pockets. So I took a few kit lessons in middle school from a guy named Ed Mays. And then I took a few other kit lessons in high school, just kind of scattered. I mean, maybe like 4 or 5 lessons, I think, from Steve Korn, who's still around teaching as well. And other than that, I mean, I had family friends here and there who just kind of knew musicians who would kind of hang out, and I would learn just bits and pieces from them. But yeah, primarily I just kind of was self-taught, basically.
And growing up in Seattle, and how old are you now?
28.
28.
I had to think about that.
Yeah,
29 soon, though.
Yeah, right on.
Next week, actually.
So aside from, as many of us know, or maybe the listeners don't know, aside from being in school and taking lessons, a big part of, once you start learning jazz and studying jazz and learning how to play, getting out and being amongst your peers and playing and going to sessions. So did you go to were there any clubs or sessions that you went to quite a bit in high school or middle school years?
Yeah. There's let's see. Well, the first, so we had combos, I guess. That probably was the first small group playing I really did in middle school, where we'd have, just basically the rhythm section from the jazz band. I mean, initially I think there were 3 jazz bands at my middle school. And I was in the junior jazz band the first year, and then I was in the senior jazz band for the last 2 years. But each of those bands had their own little combo, or I think maybe 2 combos actually. And so it was cool to kind of experience not only playing in a small group setting, but kind of with different people in a small group setting, and seeing how that changed with different instrumentations and different kind of types of players in the groups. And then, let's see, high school, kind of same thing.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to Roosevelt High School. There were combos and things.
The Scott Brown dynasty.
Yep, and he's still there too. Yeah. So but by that point we were kind of making our own groups as well, outside of school, and playing as a combo. And then outside of that whole thing, in terms of actual jam sessions around town, I started going to the Owl and Thistle jam session.
Well, you had to be 21 to go there, right?
I'm not gonna comment on that one. I think there's some law where you can play on stage.
Cabaret license.
Yeah, something like that. And that became one of my favorite sessions very quickly. And I went there for many years. I was still going until this whole pandemic happened.
Who was hosting the session? Was this when it was Eric Verlindi, Jose Martinez? Who else was?
Let's see. Yeah, when I first started going there, Jose was playing drums for the most part. Eric was there, I think, a lot of the times. It was kind of a rotating cast of regular people on the scene, but mainly, I guess, Eric and Jose. Yeah.
So prior to going to Owl and Thistle, I'm more curious about when you're in middle school and high school, and you were saying you're putting combos together, were there any venues that you guys played at regularly or put gigs together when I perform out in the Seattle area, greater Seattle area?
Any venues we performed at regularly?
Places that you played that supported young musicians, doing the jazz thing.
Yeah, we kind of started, let's see, I guess the first gig I ever played was at a coffee shop called Zoka Coffee. And we just, oh wait, was it Zoka or was it? I think it was Zoka, yeah. And we just
kind of for a minute. I can't remember. It was like maybe a couple of years, maybe, or was it shorter than that?
I think we just played there once or twice, actually. And this was in middle school. And we just kind of approached them and said, "Hey, can we play music here?" And they were gracious enough to pay us what we thought was a huge amount of money at the time, being in middle school. We were like, "Wow, I think we got like $50 each or something," which is crazy for being in middle school. And so that was kind of cool, the notion that you could be paid for playing music and having fun at the same time doing that. And then, we played at Folk Life every year. We'd bring the drums down there. My dad and I built a cart for that, actually. We would like haul the drums in and everything, and that was kind of fun. And Egan's Ballard Jam House was really friendly to younger bands, and so I started playing there, I think, in high school. I think I booked my first gig there as a band leader as maybe a sophomore in high school, something like that. And then since then, I've been playing there regularly. That's a great place for that. Let's see, what else? Middle school and high school places I played. I think that was probably about it for the most part back then.
And for going to hear things, I'm assuming you probably went to places like maybe Jazz Alley or stuff that Earshot presented, or know.
Yeah, I would go. My mom and I would sometimes go down to Jazz Alley as like a treat, And yeah, we'd go to Egan's. We'd go to. I don't think the Royal Room existed at that point.
Was the New Orleans still around, or was that on the way out?
New Orleans was around. I went there. Yep, that was a cool place. I think that was about it. I mean, during that period of time, anyway. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm also curious. So when you were at Eckstein Middle School and Roosevelt, who were some of your classmates that you went to? Are there other? It seems like it's kind of like a factory for pumping out great musicians. So who are some of your contemporaries that you went to school with that have gone on and they're still playing?
Yeah, quite a few actually. And I almost want to consider there was kind of a scene between the people who went to there were basically these two big strong programs. I mean, there were actually many big strong programs, but the ones that were localized within Seattle were the Garfield High School and Roosevelt High School scenes. And primarily speaking, the people who found themselves in Garfield kind of came up through Washington Middle School under Robert Natt, who is no longer teaching there, but he was kind of a legendary director as well. And then the Eckstein sort of went to Roosevelt scene. There were a bunch of other ones too. I mean, Edmonds Woodway and the Newport High School, and there were tons of other ones. North Bend, I think, has Mount Si. Anyway, but I kind of consider just the general crowd of people who were my age to all sort of be kind of part of the same thing. And I think that was kind of a break from the past. Because if you talk to people who are older than I am, they would say like there was this hard divide. I mean, it's almost like a Gangs of New York like divide between these programs. Like they hate each other and they compete and everything. But I had a bunch of friends who I would just play with all the time. I mean, some of those would be like, let's see, Evan Shea, Andy Clausen, Xavier Del Castillo, Matt Muntz. These are all people who are still playing professionally. Riley Mulherker, Alex Deering, Max Williams, still playing. I know, there are tons. I know, they're all going to hate me. Gus Carnes, Scotty Bemis, Alex Dugdale. I play with him all the time. And a lot of them don't live in Seattle too, so I'm like thinking about like the whole world here.
We can always edit or put them in the comments later.
I'm gonna miss some people, but there were tons of people. Jonas Myers was another one. He's playing a lot. I know I'm going to forget some people. Yeah, but yeah, that's some of them.
Yeah, and I recall, I mean, I'm a little bit older than you.
Yeah.
I'm 42 now, and I remember coming up where it was definitely a divide like what you're talking about. And we had Thomas Marriott on here last week, and he was it last week? 2 weeks ago. And he was talking about, like, he couldn't remember hardly anybody that he went to school with that was still playing, So I think part of it is there seems to be, as time goes on, more and more support for programs, the booster clubs and things of that nature, more support for venues to play, not now, obviously, because of COVID-19. But I think part of it, too, was with the different schools, if you were in this school district, that's the school that you had to go to, but you might want to play with some of these great players that went to these other schools. It was more like, hey, I want to play with good players. And more, I think younger musicians are coming to that realization where I want to play with the strongest players I can play with. And both of those programs are huge, factories of students of that nature.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment, would you say, or meh?
Definitely, yeah. And I think kind of that it sort of changed, like, as the internet and social media kind of became more of a thing, too. Because it was easier to connect with, the people who were at the other programs.
Right, so. Exactly. Yeah, I remember when I was a senior in high school. I graduated in 1997. Like, the internet was starting to, we didn't have YouTube or Spotify or, then later was Napster, all this stuff. But now, so easy to connect with players. And, as so many musicians that have been on here before, on other interviews have echoed, it really is a small community of musicians in Seattle, in the Northwest, in the U.S., in the world. Like, we have these communities, and the more and more you look at it, it's very small and connected.
It is, yeah.
So. All right, okay. So you're going to school at Eckstein. You went to Roosevelt. Did you guys do any traveling and festivals? I'm sure you did.
We did.
Any great experiences to speak of?
Yeah, that was super fortunate to be a part of that. We did. Let's see. We played the Reno Jazz Festival a bunch. We did Lionel Hampton in Idaho a bunch. Essentially Ellington in high school. Did that a bunch. I never actually won that, but we got second one of the times I was there, which was really cool because we got to play with Wynton Marsalis and everything at Lincoln Center. It was sold out, and that was amazing. We did a European tour, which was really cool. That was awesome. Playing at festivals like Umbria Jazz Festival in Italy, that was probably the pinnacle of that trip. Because you're playing, in front of like tens of thousands of people as far as you can see down the streets. And
when you guys were there, did you get the opportunity to play with any European musicians at all?
We went to a couple jam sessions, if you want to call them that, with people who were performing at the festival. To be honest, I don't remember exactly who was playing at those sessions. It was just kind of, it was packed with people, and people would just kind of like run on stage and play and run off. And so, I wouldn't necessarily say like meaningfully playing with people out there that we didn't know, but we got to play with some people, I think.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, there's a story that you've told me, and hopefully you're willing to share this now. I know that, the middle schools and the high schools in Seattle have a wonderful history of bringing in great guest artists, not only because they're in town to work with the schools, but they might be doing something with Earshot at one of the colleges, and so they line up some extra things. So who were some guest artists that you can recall that really made an impact? And the story I want in particular is you have a great story. You talk about Benny Green.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll get to that. Can you talk about any guest artists that you had the opportunity to work with when you were younger?
Yeah. There were tons, actually. And that's another really cool part of those programs. Aside from Benny Green, which I guess we're going to talk about in a minute, some of the most memorable ones were probably Rashid Ali, who was a drummer. He's a great drummer who got to play with Coltrane and among others. We actually got to hang out with him, I think, like 2 weeks before he passed away, which was really cool. A similar story, James Moody. We also got to hang with him and everything for, I think, about a month before he passed away. And his wife.
Artists shouldn't come to Roosevelt if they want longevity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, don't do that. Some other ones were Sean Jones, trumpet player. I think he's running he's one of the deans at Berklee College of Music now, I think. Matt Wilson, drummer. Let's see. Benny Green, of course. Then we worked with several people who came out as part of the essentially Ellington thing as well. So Ron Carter, the saxophonist, came out. Vincent Gardner, trombone player, came out. I might be missing one or two, but those are some of the more memorable ones. Yeah.
So, and for those of you viewers that don't know, usually like these artists will come out and work with the musicians and the bands and impart their knowledge and lessons and give insights that you wouldn't normally get in your local community.
And another cool thing was we would have a lot of local people come in too. Yes. It wasn't just, really well-known people. We would have people, like in middle school, I remember a great drummer named Byron Vinoy came in one time. And I didn't know who that was at the time, but yeah, he came in and he's just a local guy, but he's a great drummer. He doesn't really play that much anymore, I don't think, but it was cool to kind of see some of the people who were on the scene in Seattle as well, and get to meet them. I mean, people like Mark Taylor would come into Roosevelt all the time, saxophonist. One of the directors, actually, Stuart McDonald, another saxophone player, he kind of introduced us to a lot of people on the scene. And we would be strongly encouraged to go out and see music all the time. He would tell us where people were playing and when to go see things. And so that was really cool too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important. And Seattle's kind of had that for a long time, where you have like a venue like Jazz Alley or other theaters that'll present, record label artists or people that are, touring and traveling all the time. And then they also seem to have, not right now, obviously,
right.
venues to support lots of local artists. We can go hear them and play and interact with them and learn. So I think that's super important.
Yeah.
So hopefully
definitely.
we can weather the storm with this and see what happens in the months, hopefully weeks to come. Who knows? All right. So tell the Benny Green story. This is a great story.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, this, I'll preface this by saying that I don't think everyone would have responded to this in the same way that I did, but
we should say, for those who don't know Benny Green, who Benny Green is, he's one of the arguably one of the most talented jazz piano players on the face of the planet today.
Yep. I think he was the last or one of the last jazz messengers with Art Blakey's Jazz Messengers. And he takes music incredibly seriously. And I'll also say that since then, we've sort of maintained contact and are on much friendlier terms at this point. So Benny Green came into Roosevelt to do a clinic with the band. And I think I was probably 16 maybe at the time or something like that. Maybe 17. I don't remember exactly how old I was. But anyway, I was in the jazz band, the top jazz band, and Benny came in to work with the entire band. And so we started out just playing a song so we could kind of hear how the band sounded. And I think we played maybe an A section or half of a song or something, and then that was that. And then basically, I think he asked me specifically then, he said, okay, well, do you want to be a professional musician? And I, of course, said yes, even though I really wasn't totally sure at the time, but I said yes. And he's like, well, okay, because that's going to change how I, critique the band and you specifically. So I was like, oh boy, okay. So I think the first thing he asked after that was who some of my favorite drummers were. And me being 16-year-old me or whatever, I knew a little bit about who Benny Green was, but not that much. And I knew that he had played with Art Blakey, so I said, Art Blakey, and I did like Art Blakey. I really hadn't done my homework at that point in time with many musicians.
Now, hold on a second. Not to interrupt, but to interrupt. For people that don't know what you're talking about, what do you mean by do your homework?
By do my homework, I mean, so if I'm going to talk about a drummer or a musician or anything, actually, you really want to know what you're talking about, basically. I mean, you got to do your research. In the case of musicians, listen to a bunch of the stuff they've done, as much as you can find, basically.
Which means know the songs, know the solos.
Yeah, know the solos, know the characteristics of their playing, the things that identify them as being them. All kinds of just anything about them, that shapes who they are and what they've done. Anyways, yeah, so I really hadn't done my homework with most things at that point in time. But, I'm 15 or 16 or 17. And so I said, yeah, I like Art Blakey. And so he just kind of smiles and says, oh, okay, well, what are some of your favorite recordings? And I think I knew maybe 1 or 2 Art Blakey albums at that point in time. I don't even remember which one I said, but I said some album, and he's like, okay, yeah, that's a great album. I really like this and this and this that happens on this album, And he's like, well, what else? And at this point, I'm like, uh-oh. So I think I maybe knew of like one other album at that point in time, and it quickly became apparent that I really didn't know what I was talking about. And he exaggerated that notion basically for everyone. And so we went on and on and on about, people I need to listen to and check out and why and what they're, what I should listen for and everything. And then it came down to playing time. And he repeatedly had to say that he was not a Dr. Beat salesperson because of how many times he mentioned Dr. Beat metronomes. Which basically should give you an idea how much he was talking about. Basically how my time needed to be better, which, to be fair, was true. And that let me know. But, long story short, he spent the entire clinic, I think it was a 2-hour clinic, only talking to me. And, the entire band is there, the director, like parents, I think some booster people were there. Random people who just wanted to watch were there. And he just spent the entire 2 hours just hammering me with just what I needed to work on and everything. Didn't even address the rest of the band from like after the first 5 minutes. And at one point he got so worked up, he actually had to go excuse himself to go to the hallway and basically just curse out thin air for 5 minutes, cool off, and then he came back in and continued. So needless to say, most people I think in that situation, myself included, were kind of contemplating, okay, do I quit drums right now, or do I maybe think about this and take to heart what he's saying and, pick myself up and actually do this stuff. So thankfully I didn't quit. And I think in hindsight, the fact that someone who's done that much, cared that much, just period, cared enough to actually, basically destroy me as a musician in front of a bunch of people. I don't think that was his intention necessarily. I don't think he was trying to embarrass me or anything, really. I think he was just earnestly trying to impart what he felt about the way I was playing the drums at that point. And that was probably one of the biggest things that has shaped how I carry myself as a musician and approach music now. Just knowing that people who are on that caliber care that much, or at least he did, and I know some other people are like that too. And knowing that is special, I think, because oftentimes you won't get that with educators.
No, not from that caliber of musician / educator, because I know he does a lot of those types of things as well.
Yeah,
and that's coming from a place of holding that music very seriously because of all the people that have sacrificed and imparted their knowledge
he
onto him.
loves jazz and is always brutally honest.
Yeah.
Period.
Well, and I think look at Max Holmberg in 2020 and that all you've accomplished and taught and shared in your lifetime thus far. That was a good investment on his part, and kudos to you for taking it in stride and taking the ball and running with it.
Oh yeah, well, there's plenty more to do, but thanks.
All right. Well, so after high school, I know you when you came back from college, so I don't know much before that. So, you went to the Berklee College of Music in Boston. Mm-hmm. So, what gave you the decision to go there?
Actually, after that Benny Green clinic, I basically decided that I wanted to do music. And I was going to go study it somewhere where there were more people who did it. and more of a history of jazz, especially.
So why Berklee versus like the Manhattan School of Music or Juilliard or the New School, or how'd you come to Berklee?
Well, to be honest, I didn't apply to Juilliard because you have to apply on vibraphone as well as drums, and I'm still not really a fan of playing the piano. I mean, I can use the piano, I know how everything works, and I've studied harmony and everything, but I still don't really enjoy it. I'm not a pianist, and I'm not a vibraphonist. And then, so I actually only applied to Berklee and the New School and New England Conservatory. And I went to Berklee because they gave me the largest scholarship, because my parents said, you're on your own, have fun, good job going to college, but you're going to have to pay for it. So that's why I went there.
Fair enough. And so you were there for 4 years?
Yep.
4 years, okay. And I know a few of your classmates because they're now here in Seattle playing on the scene, but who else were some of your classmates and contemporaries when you were at Berklee? Because they've got a huge music department.
Oh, boy, that's a lot of people. It's the largest music school, I think, in the world. They've got, when I was there, I think there were 5,000 students.
Don't they have satellite campuses in other countries?
Yeah,
too?
they've got one in Valencia in Spain. I think they off and on have one in Greece or something, and I wasn't a part of those campuses at all, but yeah, they do. And okay, so people that you might have heard of that were at Berklee when I was there, people like Justin Faulkner, drummer, ridiculous drummer. Oh man, there's so many people. I'm trying to think about the people who left before graduating first, because that was kind of a thing that would happen. Yeah. And I think a lot of these people, there are a lot of people who you're going to hear about in the next maybe 10 years, kind of rising stars. One of my good friends, Jairus Yoakley, actually, he's another drummer, amazing musician. And we'd be up practicing next to each other in these practice rooms all night. And he, I think, he was just on the cover of Modern Drummer magazine, and so he's starting to get pretty well known. Okay, let's see, who else? I know there are tons, and now that I'm thinking about it, it's okay, who are they?
And we can put them in the comments later, so that's
yeah,
okay.
You can put them in the comments later. They're all going to hate me for not mentioning them now. Let's see. Can I come back to this one? I'm gonna make a list in my head and then revisit this.
With most of these things, usually it's only an hour, and we always run out of time, so we'll have to do another one because there's so much more that's happened since then. So I'm going to ask you, what I should say right now, because we're getting close to a little over half here. If anyone has any questions for Max or anything about what we're talking about you want to have answered, feel free to let us know in the comments, and we'll do our best to get to them if we can. If not, we're just going to keep talking here. So when you were at Berklee, you had a bunch of great players, students that you were going to school with. I'm assuming there were opportunities to play in the city around. Yes, no?
Yeah. I had a weekly gig at a club called Wally's for about 3 years, which is I think Boston's oldest jazz club. And that's a whole story in and of itself. It wasn't my band, but it was this guy named Oliver Monaco's band. And that was cool. That was one of the places to play. A lot of the scene was actually just basically through the schools. I mean, so Berklee had a few venues that people would play at. NEC had a scene in Boston, New England Conservatory. There was Scholar's Jazz Club. There was Ryle's Jazz Club. There was, the Regatta Bar, which is another jazz club. I mean, there were a handful of places kind of around the city that were not part of the school scene. Some were just kind of background gigs, and some were more performance-oriented. And there were a bunch of non-jazz venues as well. I mean, it wasn't just jazz when I was there. It was all kinds of music, which is pretty cool to be around. But yeah.
All right. And so there's a couple other musicians that now live and reside here in Seattle that you went to school with. That's bassist Greg Feingold, who we'll be playing with later today, and guitarist Cole Schuster. Mm-hmm. So how did you get in touch with those guys? Were you had mutual classes with them, or just knew them from around school, or how did that relationship come about?
So I met Greg. I was working as an accompanist for Berklee while I was studying there. It's kind of like the musical version of a TA or something. And so we would play for piano department classes and voice department classes, and occasionally a random other thing or two. And they would just have these rhythm sections that were hired to basically be the band for like these classes that were comprised of 15 piano players or 15 singers or whatever. And so Greg was in that as well, and so that's how I met him. I think we were in Joanne Breckin's piano class, or maybe it was. We played for a bunch of different classes. It was one of those ones, and we just instantly had this nice time feel together, and it was really fun to play together. And then that was how I met him. Cole, I think, was in the voice department as an accompanist as well, but I don't remember if I actually met Cole at essentially Ellington in high school, and then we figured it out later that was where we initially met. But yeah, that's how we. Yeah.
So when you were in Joanne Brackeen's workshop, number one, I mean, she's amazing. She came and did a workshop when I was going to school at Cornish. This had to be like somewhere between 2000 and 2002, and that was like.
She's another jazz messenger. Actually.
Yeah. And that was probably they had several artists come through and do workshops, and that was, I can remember, like something for me that was very helpful in my development as a musician was watching her give her workshop and talk about music, and her thoughts about it was great. I'm curious, when you were in her group, did you get the opportunity to play with her, or was she just kind of...
All the time.
Okay.
It was awesome. That was, I think, one of the best parts of being at Berklee was actually being an accompanist and getting to play with all the professors. Because it was... And not only that, but hearing them talk to other piano players about playing and us. I mean, they would tell us what to do too.
Yeah. Conceptually, learning concepts.
It was awesome. That was amazing.
Yeah. Well, again, there's a million more questions I want to ask you. Okay, so I didn't know about Joanne Breckin. This is the first I've heard about that. And it's tough because a lot of times now, like, we'll be on gigs together. It's like, show up to the gig, play the gig, maybe have a drink after, and then I got to drive and go back home. So we never get a chance to hang and talk. But that's why
especially
this is great.
These days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. So, all right. So other faculty members besides Joanne Breckin that you were able to study with?
Outside of the drums, yeah. Some of my favorite ones were, let's see. I mean, Joanne Breckin was one. George, I'm forgetting everyone's name right now. Oh my goodness.
Does he play?
Piano. I can't remember anyone's name at the moment. Yeah, I'll make a list of these too. There were tons. Yeah, I'll make a list of those later.
Was Billy Pierce still around? Did you get a chance to hang?
Yep, he was there. I played for his classes a couple times. I think he was actually substituting when I was playing with or for his classes, but yeah. Another jazz messenger. Yeah, and people would actually come into those classes too sometimes if they're just in town because they're friends with these people, you know, and they'd say, "Oh, hey, what's up? I'm going to come hang." And then next thing you know, you have these like super heavyweight world-class musicians just hanging and co-teaching classes, and you get to play with them half the time, which is really cool.
All right. Well, I have more questions about Berklee, but do we have any questions so far? Are there any? No questions. Okay, we'll keep going. So after Berklee, did you come? Did you stay in Boston for a while? Did you come straight back to Seattle, or how did that come about? How did you coming back to Seattle? How did that happen?
I came straight back. Yep.
Did you have any like plan in mind of what you wanted to do, or?
I wanted to play a lot, basically. Yeah, it was pretty open-ended at that point.
I remember when I first heard about you, I called like my normal drummers that I called, and everyone was busy, but they're like, "Have you heard this guy, Max Holmberg?" I'm like, "No." I said, "Give me his number." So, and I was like, "Are you sure he can play?" "Oh yeah, he can play just fine." And I remember calling you, and it was great, and I've known you ever since, and we've done several gigs together, and since coming back, you were playing, you started teaching, and in that time, you also convinced Greg Feingold and Cole Schuster to move to Seattle, and you started a band, the 200 Trio. Now, did that start in Boston first and then come here, or how did that come about, that band?
We would play together in Boston, yeah. I had a dorm room, and Greg would split his time between New York and Boston a lot of the time. frequently would end up crashing on my floor in some capacity. Cole would occasionally just hang out late enough that he would crash as well. And so we would just kind of play music all the time. And then it's kind of a long story how they ended up here, but
I got another infamous house story, isn't it? Just like, I think earlier we talked about Thomas Marriott, and there was that house in Seattle that everybody lived in, and you guys had the infamous musician house.
Yep. There was a flight that actually had a gig with Thomas Marriott, and it was at a print shop where they make giant banners for sports teams. And Greg had called me a few days earlier and said, hey, I'm thinking about like big life changes or something. And I was like, hey, well, come out to Seattle. And he was like, all right. So he did. And he had a layover in L.A., and so we called up Cole and said, hey, get on this airplane to Seattle. Like, what are you doing? Cole got on the airplane, and next thing we know, they both land in SeaTac, and we go straight to a gig with Thomas Marriott, of all people. And played the gig. Cole didn't even have an amp. He just played his guitar. And there's another funny story that happened at that gig where this guy was hitting on Greg and printed this huge, bigger-than-life banner of Greg, and he doesn't have any he had like paper clips or something as his cufflinks, and it's hilarious because it's huge. But that's a whole other story. But that's how they ended up here. We found a house at some point and all lived together with a couple other musicians, and it's still occupied by musicians today, actually.
Well, that's one of the things that I've admired about you watching since I've first met you till now is your capacity to put things together and see things through that are very, very cool for the community. Not only living situations, but gigs and opportunities for people to play and teach.
Thanks.
One is that I can think of is the jam session, the Angry Beaver in Seattle. That's been going on. Well, not right now, but it's been going on for how many years has that been? It's a jam session on Sundays.
I hadn't thought about it, but I guess October would have been the 5 or 6 year anniversary. I don't know, 5 or 6 years, I think. Yeah. That would have been like mid-October.
And that's kind of a boon as well because the guy, Tim Pipes, the owner, he's Canadian expat, correct?
Something like that, yeah.
And so he started that bar, and it was like the only hockey bar in Seattle prior to them having a hockey team.
Yeah.
And now they're going to have a hockey team.
Yep.
Well, we'll see what happens. But
and he's actually a Berklee grad as well.
As a musician?
Yeah. Yeah, he was a bass player.
And I had no idea. I'd love to hear him play sometime.
Yeah, good luck getting him to get his bass out.
Well, we hope things are at some point they're able to open up again and resume the session and the club because it's cool and I love all the staff there and Tim's great and you guys are great. There's also what's the other part you're doing? It's the Secret. Can you talk about this, please?
Yeah. So I've been running this other thing called the Secret Jazz Club through Airbnb, it's basically just a different way of booking a jazz venue. Because instead of having like a brick and mortar place that is the venue full time, it's just kind of a pop-up jazz club kind of thing where there's a rotating band, and then people hear about it through Airbnb or elsewhere.
But it's not just a rotating band because through your connections all over the United States, you'll have monstrously talented players that are coming through town. And
well, that's kind of the cool thing is that the band is a secret until people show up. And so even if they're playing some other place in town, people won't really know about it. And that's not to say that they will be playing there if they're playing in town. But, it's kind of cool. And that, of course, is on pause as well right now. But hopefully at some point that'll come back.
Well, something that's not on pause is there is a project that you're working on with Jazz Club Northwest with Danny Kolke and Chris Seimer, where you guys will do like remote recording and then people will join and play. Can you talk about that project a little bit?
Yeah. I think Danny is calling it the virtual jam session. So he and I and Chris Seimer recorded tons of videos just as a backing track, basically, and then just for some standards. As a piano trio, and no one soloed or anything, just basically comping and playing behind what would be the melody and the solos. And then Denny put those together and uploaded them as backing tracks, and then people basically send in recordings of themselves playing melody and solos over the tune, and then he edits all that stuff together and puts them online.
And how did that project come about with you guys as a trio?
That was just an idea Danny had. He just called me up one day and said, "Hey, let's do this virtual jam thing," and so we did it.
Right on. Well, the other thing that I've noticed about you and playing and all your involvement in the music community is outside of jazz, you do a lot of other things as well. I think there's been some musical theater, and you've done some touring with some, I can't remember the Arsonists that were doing more like rock, funk kind of stuff. Can you talk about some of these other projects you've been involved with?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the Arsonists, I would say, it's definitely more jazz than rock, funk, but it's well. I'm not in Ghost Note, although that's a great band, and I would love to play with Ghost Note.
There was a band that you were doing some touring with, and I can't remember. It's been a few years now, but it was not it was definitely not straight ahead jazz. It was something else.
That was probably the Arsonists. Okay. Yeah, we did some tours. Yeah, I've done some things here and there with, I think, Eric Patterson's band. We've done a couple out-of-state things, and that's funk, hard funk even. Arsonists, we haven't played in a while, although we just recently started talking about things again. But that band's really fun. It's jazz based. It's kind of like I don't even know how to describe it. We created it to be in quotes, the most burning band in the universe. Hence the Arsonists. There's actually a funny story about this.
I never got that till just now.
Yeah. Yeah, we were actually, we were on a tour. We played down in, we were in Oakland, and there's this, the first African-American bookstore west of the Mississippi is in Oakland, and it's called the Marcus Bookstore. And like anyone who's, in African-American history is basically spoken there. It's this legendary place, and we rolled up to play there. We got there a little early, and so we parked next to the building, and this like weird camper van in front of us is like rocking back and forth. And this guy opens the door, and he's wearing like basically nothing except for like a tank top and some boxers. He's holding a huge beer, and he's like, "Hey guys, look over there." It's just like, what? Like, look over, and there's a fire right behind the building where the bookstore is in. And so we called the fire department, and thankfully they were able to put out the fire before it burned down the bookstore. But as the owner showed up, she was very thankful that the fire was put out, but she was like, "You guys are called what again?" The what? So it was kind of this odd moment, but the Marcus Bookstore was saved. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're getting close to the end here. Are there any questions that have come in yet? No, okay. Okay. Well, I know you also do a fair amount of teaching, both private instruction, and then you've also worked with some school programs as well. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. I've been teaching privately for a while, quite a while. And I've done some guest artist things. Let's see. Both at schools around the Sound and at some colleges and stuff. I've done stuff at University of Virginia, Whitman College, Eastern Washington University, a handful of other places. Just some schools around the area. I work a lot with Mercer Island High School, among other places. But yeah, I teach. I do a couple occasional like jazz workshops as well, just on my own.
And I'm assuming right now, currently, like most of us, you're doing a lot of online stuff.
Oh yeah, it's all online pretty much. Yep.
So Zoom fatigue is real, yes?
Yeah, it's not. You know what? It's not as bad now as when I started because I kind of have the setup dialed in. I've got a couple cameras set up and the sound is dialed in, so it's not quite as bad as just throwing the laptop in front of a set of drums. But yeah, it's not ideal. I'm sure you can relate to this.
Yeah, the audience doesn't know though. I mean, they don't want to hear me. But all right. Well, so if somebody wanted, hang on a second. Do we have a question? Looks like we have a question.
A comment was they love the band name stories.
Oh.
Are there any other funny band name stories that you have?
Oh, the Arsonists. Well, let's see. Arsonists. That's about the only funny Arsonists name story that we have.
What are the questions that we have?
Okay, do
Do you have any suggestions for any non-drumming music students to develop a good sense of rhythm time?
Yeah. I mean, rhythm isn't limited to drumming. Any musician, I think, should be working on rhythm all the time. I mean, it just happens to be my favorite of the three big pillars of music, being melody, harmony, and rhythm. But everything from, I mean, obviously practicing with a metronome and working on primary divisions, which are basically beats, in a measure, and then subdivisions from there. And you can just work your way up. What I like to do is start with just whole notes. So pick a tempo, and then go whole notes, and then half note triplets, half notes, quarter notes, or quarter note triplets, whatever the order would be. Just go up the ladder of subdivisions, basically between 2s and 3s, all the way through 16th notes and 16th note triplets and beyond. And then you can even practice weird things, if you want to get into like quintuplets and septuplets and stuff like that, just dividing time equally, basically. And then beyond that, if you want to practice time, I mean, you can think about it on like a much bigger scale. Like if you're walking down the street, you can think about the rhythm of walking, and then you can kind of think about subdivisions within that, or kind of snap your fingers in your pocket or something. And this might just be me being like really nerdy or something. Maybe I'm the only one who does this.
This is all good stuff. This is all good stuff. My wife thinks I'm crazy because I do this same stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I like to find weird rhythms. Like if my left turn signal is on, I'll try and make a weird rhythm with it or something. Or
don't wreck your car.
No, don't do that. Yeah, but rhythm's everywhere. So
what other questions?
Well, yeah, so when I was in high school, I guess when I came back on summer and winter breaks during Berklee as well, I would play with a bunch of groups, then we would make up new band names every time for each gig. So, like, there was one, actually, Cole Schuster came up from California one summer, or one winter, I can't remember which, with a saxophonist named Christian Cho, and we were rehearsing in my parents' living room, and we were trying to think of a name for the band. And there's a really, really old cartoon thing called a shmoo. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a shmoo, but it basically looks like a happy, smiling bowling pin with legs, kind of. And there was like a random shmoo doll thing in the living room for some reason. And so we ended up calling that band the Shmoo 7. Even though it was not a 7-piece band. I think it was a quartet or a quintet. But that band was called Shmoo 7, just because of that. Another one, Tasty Trio. That's another funny band name, I guess. That one has been off and on playing since I was in middle school, I think. And that's with Matt Muntz, who's a great bassist and composer living in New York, and Max Williams. And I guess, let's see, that one... There's some funny things that we would do, like we would play, there's a song called Prelude to a Kiss. It's a Duke Ellington Strayhorn composition. I don't remember who actually wrote it. But we would play that song at a slower tempo every single time we play it. So we are at like paint drying speed at this point. And we released an album called EP, but it ended up being called Taste EP. So if you put that together, Taste EP that could be another another funny name. There are some puns in a lot of band names. I got a bunch of bootlegs from Egan's, I think, with strange band names, but those are some of the most memorable ones, I guess.
Well, we're close to running out of time here because we got to start getting a sound check for the broadcast here, the performance. If people want to find out more about how to study with you or learn, get some lessons or find out what's going on with your projects, with the 200 Trio or the Secret Jazz performances, how can they do that? Where can they find out about that stuff?
Just Google my name, Google Max Holmberg, or if you want to remember my website, it's percussivejazz.com as it's spelled. It's spelled as it sounds. Or Instagram, all that stuff. I'm on all of those things pretty much.
Is there a regular website that has all this stuff on there too? You said it's percussive.
Yeah, percussivejazz.com is like my website, and that has links to everything. So that would be the best way to do that.
Any other questions? All right. Well, Max, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you watching, we're just going to take a short break here, and we're going to start the concert at 6 o'clock with a bunch of brand new tunes for you. And so stick around. Thank you so much for joining us. Max, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Kareem.
All right.